There was, I think, a study that kind of sets the tone for our conversation here. It was called the trust gap, and it was done a little over a year ago. And it identified something really interesting. 74% of B2B buyers don't trust the customer evidence that we present to them. This idea of trust in B2B, in ABM, it's a relationship based business. If we don't have trust, our brands are trust marks. So we have an identity crisis as companies. We have an identity crisis as marketers leading the charge in our organizations. This is not a small topic. Here's what I want to ask you is what do you believe is the core reasons behind the issues here? The trust gap as we talk about it. What's driving that?
Yeah, there are a lot of factors. I think in many ways, the sources of authority that we would go to as our sources of truth are under question. News now is more fragmented. When we think about where we would go to look for information to make our, whether you call it your buyer's decision journey, or whether you would go to look for information to figure out how do you source particular piece of information. All of those, we went from not having enough information to having way too much information. The information is now fragmented. Beyond being fragmented now, there is a lack of trust in the sources of information. We then went to, we had third party validation through, did we then trust whether it's the analyst firms, or maybe we were trusting the reviewers, or maybe we were trusting said influencers. Every time we tried to create these pockets of high authority centers of trust that would help drive people towards a particular decision criteria, it didn't land, it didn't stick because we would end up with yet more piece of information. Now, with the augment of having direct access for both the consumers, like the users of the product, to the buyers of the product, to the providers of a product or a service, all of the intermediaries and all of the channels now are coming under threat. So, is there a reason for that? There's too much for our consumers, our customers to navigate for them to go from point A to point B. And so, in that environment, how do you make a decision? And then when you layer on top of that the pressures of, like, when you're an enterprise in a B2B environment, when you layer on top of that this cost pressures that every single enterprise is faced with, right? There's a lot of tension and pressure on making a decision. So people are avoiding making decisions. It's almost the risk that is just too high to make a wrong decision. So it's almost better to not do something than to make a wrong decision. And that's adding to the entire equation in itself. And it's leading to people like waiting instead of moving forward and making the right decision. The entire decision making framework is that threat because of that